Good afternoon, I'm Barb Greve. I am one of the co-chairs of this year's Right Relationship team. Up on my left, your right, are other members of our teams, both this year's and past years. They'll each have a moment to introduce themselves. My apologies for our slightly late start, but I had to find a gender-neutral bathroom to use, and it wasn't conveniently located to where we are, so my apologies on that one. I'm hoping that you are here because you want to learn how to do right relationship work in your congregations. If you're not, stay anyway. We'd love to have you with us. To give you a sense of
That's why I got a seat.
There's a seat up front.
You're like, I got a seat.
Knowing what you need and what you're ready to do is the first step to being in right relationship. I want to give you a little bit of what's going to happen for the next hour or so. We're going to give you a little bit of history, how the Right Relationship team came to exist at General Assembly, some of the impact that that team has had on some of our lives. Some of our members will share an example or two of what they, as members of the team, have done in the context of Right Relationship to help others at General Assembly enter into or return to Right Relationship. Then I'll give you a little bit of a sense of where we've gone from where we started to where we are today. And then we'll talk a little bit about strategies to bring it back into your congregation. And if there's time after that, we're going to have you practice some of the skills needed to mediate right relationships. And if there's time after that, we'll take some questions. So with that, I'm going to invite up Elandria Williams, who was there when it all began.
Hello, everybody. All right, so here it goes. Can you hear me? No. Yeah. I use a mic for extra something, I don't know what, because my voice is really loud. Actually, I'm actually louder without a mic, honestly. Here it goes. I'm just messing with you. It woke you up right in this hot room. Because it's pretty, I'm hot, and I never get hot. So my name's Elandria Williams, and so history for the Right Relationship team. The question is what to share, what's actually important, and what's a little too much information for the amount of time we have. But here's what I'll say that I think is essential. In 2007, the Right Relationship team started. Me and Petra Aldrich did a lot of the work in helping create it. It got started not because of something that happened the year before, which is what some people will say to you. It got started because we have not, in the history of our denomination, had a way for people to express what was going on. You could complain all you wanted, but there was no direct channel to say, here's how we can actually discuss these issues. It was started out of racism. That's it. I want to be very clear. Racism. We're in a specific time in our lives right now. If we do not realize that that's the root and it has to stay at the root, then we will actually perpetuate white supremacy. And we will actually have the same stuff happen over and over again. So now that I've said that, because I don't have a choice, I'm sorry. People I love a lot are gone from this faith. It got started, and out of that, we were like, how, when we start the first one, do we also honor that even though racism was why it got started, racism is a part of intersectional identities. I am queer. I'm differently abled. I'm a lot of things. I'm not just Black and Native, right? So how do we honor that? And so the first team was actually made up of, we went through and said, okay, drum. We actually asked people from the UU Ministers Association, Loretta. We asked people from every single group that had that was really organized in a particular way. Could you please have a representative on the Right Relationship team? So people knew that they had somebody to talk to. We purposely wanted elders and young people and people in between. We wanted people that people knew really well, had seen on the stage, and people no one had ever seen before in their lives, right? That were new, because we needed people to represent all of what our faith embodies. That was really essential and important. And so they'll talk about where it is now. I've been on the team almost every time I've ever been to GA, which is a lot, and probably more than everybody else, actually, at this point. But I think that what we've tried to do is try to create channels for people to really think, how is GA different? GA is not the same as it was back then. It's a lot better, frankly, in terms of those things. There's still things that come up, but now we have a method and a ways for them to go. And so I think that's it.
Hello. Can everybody see me back there? Nope? Okay. Let me see if I can. Can everybody see me back there? All right, great. I can't. The mics.
Well, we can use our mic for that.
There we go. I think we got it. All right. I'm Raziq Brown. I am co-leader with this wonderful gentleman here. I have been on the Right Relationship team since forever, almost as much as Elandria has. But I've served on it 5 times. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the racism that she was talking about that kind of got some of this started along. So how many people here went to GA Fort Worth a couple years back? Okay, not that many. See, GA has changed quite a bit. There were some microaggressions that happened at the conference, at the assembly, and a little bit before with the youth of color and young adult of color groups that were staying in a Dallas church. Basically, a very simple microaggression happened in which we were staying at the church, lovely church. I'm from Fort Worth. I love the Dallas church. We were there. We were sleeping. The showers had stopped working, and after we had told some people on staff, hey, the showers had stopped working, someone had suggested that we should go outside and shower with a hose. Well, that was one of the things that happened. There were also police officers that stopped us for walking around the church because first, Dallas is in a very affluent neighborhood, and Black Unitarians don't look very affluent, I guess. I don't know how that works. So then when we got to GA, so that conference was right before General Assembly. We got to General Assembly, and while we were there, many youth and young adults of color had issues in which attendees thought they were bag handlers, or thought that they didn't belong at the conference because they didn't have their name badge on all the time. So again, you can imagine some people were upset, and they had no one to complain to. They had no one to talk to. They had no one to bring these issues to. And at that conference, there was a dance. At that General Assembly, there was a dance. And a bunch of the youth and young adults of color were walking with their youth and young adult friends of, I guess, not color. And they, and as they were walking into the dance hall or the ballroom, a couple of the ushers stopped the youth and young adults of color who didn't have badges and let the white youth continue on in. And at this point, as you can imagine, those youth and young adults of color were like, all right, we've had it. That's enough. We're done. And so they kind of stopped business, any of the business that was going on that night. And a large conversation started. And that conversation and other conversations that have happened kind of got us on the path that Elandria had started us on. I would also like to speak to the fact that to some of the right relationship teamwork I've done not in General Assembly. So when I used to do a little bit of advisor work for youth. I advised a camp, U down in Texas, and one of the conversations that we had is that we wanted to phase out this position that exists in a lot of youth groups called the youth chaplain. We felt that it was kind of problematic in the sense that youth aren't chaplains. Chaplains go through training. Chaplains are ministers. Chaplains are people who, they learn to deal with very serious issues. We are peers. We are peers, we are friends, we're here to help, we're here to listen, and we can even do a little bit of conflict management too. But when the real serious stuff happens, we need to bring a minister, someone who's been trained in on the situation. And so I was brought in to help try to start a right relationship team, or get a right relationship team started in at UBarU. And so far it's been very helpful and it's been very successful. Mostly because we work as a way for youth who are maybe intimidated by the chaplain and their role, or intimidated by someone with the REV in front of their name. They can come to us first, and we can talk to them about how they can talk to a chaplain. And it's been very helpful. We have youth talking to their ministers now. Ministers don't seem as scary. And it's been I think that at this workshop, I hope you learn a lot. This can be very beneficial for your own local and district, your own local congregations and your districts and your regions.
You want me to? I'll stand at the podium. Hi, I'm the Reverend Lisa Bovey-Kemper, Associate Minister in Asheville, North Carolina. This is my second year. Thank you. This is my second year on the Right Relations team. And I think of right relationship as closely intertwined with the concept of our covenantal faith. And it's really important for us to continue to stay in relationship with each other long enough to understand what the underlying challenges are. I have a brief example of something that happened at a General Assembly. And the reason I chose to share this particular story is because it really demonstrates the sort of levels of engagement, the levels of issues that are going on in a given situation. The problem presented itself as an issue about gender-neutral bathrooms. Somebody who was uncomfortable, who came in and said, "I am uncomfortable with gender-neutral bathrooms." The initial piece of the conversation was all focused on practical considerations. Concerns about whether the bathrooms would be messy, concerns with very specific practical things about a gender-neutral restroom. I was able to engage in conversation over a period of time and begin to understand that those practical issues were just the words that the person with the presenting challenge had to express some very much deeper issues that were going on. And as it turned out, the right relationship issue was that this person was a volunteer. The person was a teller in the main plenary hall, the general session hall, and was receiving a lot of questions, some antagonistic, about why do we have gender-neutral bathrooms? What is the issue? I don't understand this. I don't understand. And so all of these questions were getting directed at this volunteer person who didn't have the depth of understanding of the issue to be able to answer those questions, and therefore the person felt ill-equipped, the person felt attacked, the person felt like they were out of right relationship with multiple people in the community. So as a part of that ongoing conversation, I was able to discern, first of all, with this person that was what the challenge was, and then we were able to have a conversation in which we discussed one of my favorite things to discuss, which is, this is a question I always ask, and it's really, really essential, I think, to right relationship work, which is, what is your highest value? What is your highest value in this situation? If I'm trying to solve a problem and I identify that my highest value is efficiency, I am going to come up with one solution for that problem. If I am trying to solve a problem and my highest value is relationship and inclusion, I'm going to come up with an entirely different solution to the same problem. And neither of those solutions are wrong or incorrect. It has to do with what you have identified your highest value to be. So in this particular case, we discussed that we have determined that as a General Assembly, that one of our high values is inclusion and helping people, ensuring as best we can that people who are gender nonconforming have a safe, comfortable, and accessible place to use the restroom. We understand that members of our community have expressed to us, I am cisgender, that's why I am using the language that I use in this particular case, have expressed that bathrooms are essential and challenging and dangerous and scary. And so my highest value in the gender-neutral bathroom conversation is not practical. It is not any of those things. It is a relational value, high value, and it is a safety and inclusion value. And so we were able, in this case, to have a conversation in which the person then went away with some tools, some more information about why we care about this, why it's happening, what the sort of backstory was, and then my hope is, I don't have specific feedback on this, but my hope is that this person felt like they were able to go back into that general session room and be part of a conversation that was useful and life-giving to that person and to the people who were in the room in various ways and places. And so that's what I offer you in terms of right relations in your congregation is that question: what is our highest value in this situation? Because we will come up with different solutions based on what that highest value is. And the highest value can change in the same problem-solving process. You have to be flexible with it, but it's a really concise and effective question to engage these conversations.
Hi, everyone. I'm Halcyon Westall. I'm Assistant Director of the... Louder. I'm Halcyon Westall, Assistant Director of the FOZ Collaborative, and I'm also a Loretta Good Officer. And I feel like the role of being a good officer for Loretta has been the most fruitful and useful in my work on the Right Relationship team. The past 2 years, I'm not on it this year. And the thing that I wanted to share with you about that time is how valuable it's been for me to be on the team and how different it was than what I thought it was going to be like. There are a couple of ways that I want to describe this. I think of preparing for doing right relationship work has a lot to do with knowing where you end and where other people begin, of orienting yourself around whatever, I guess it's preparing yourself and know why you're in the space and not just accepting whatever anybody hands you. And I'm a very concrete thinker, so I have a really concrete example story. It was my first day on the Right Relationship team. I'm in the plenary hall, and that year we had bright orange t-shirts so everyone could see us, right? So I've got my back to the door, and I hear, right relationship lady, right relationship lady. Wow, okay, the shirts work. And I turn around, and there's someone with a program book. Oh, I wish I had a prop. So she's pointing it at me, and she says, here. And I went, and I grabbed it, right? I'm closer now. She held out a program book to me, and I grabbed it. because I thought someone is handing me something. She's identified that she needs to talk to me. And of course I'm going to take this thing because I care about all these people, these 5,000 people here today, right? So I grabbed the book from the lady and she says, someone left this on a park bench outside and that's just so terrible and you need to take it. This was my first right relationship team action. I'm like, okay, now I'm holding this book. And this is not mine to hold at all. And it was such a great thing to be my very first interaction because it was so very clear. Don't just take whatever anybody hands you without sort of talking to them first and finding out if it's yours to hold, right? So totally concrete example and so true. And the whole rest of that week and the following year, I was able to call that experience up in my mind each time I started to talk to someone. And I was able to prepare myself. Okay, we're going into this interaction. Is this a right relationship team issue? And I think Raziq this year was saying, think about what you are concerned about. Is it feelings? That goes to the chaplains. If it's a conflict, come to the right relationship team. So that's one of the first things that we were taught to do to sort, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about sorting. And when you're in your congregations of saying, all right, someone's coming to me with this big thing. I need to sort of categorize it and see where it goes. Is this something where someone really needs to process and process their feelings? And that seems like such a gift for our congregants because we don't necessarily do a lot of practice around this in our congregations of, I'm having this big thing. And sometimes it's a feeling and we don't talk about feelings, right? We don't recognize in ourselves that this problem might be a feeling. And there's lots of names for feelings and probably about 120 words for just one feeling, but we only learn one or two: mad, sad, right? We know those feelings, but there's just so many more. So I think that has been the most valuable for me personally and what I would say to bring into your work around right relationships in your congregations.
Hi, my name is Phoebe Masterson-Eckart. Louder. Is it better now if I'm closer? Okay. Oh, this is a lot of leaning. My name is Phoebe Masterson-Eckart. This is my third year on the Right Relationship team. It's also my first year not attending GA as a youth, which is a fun fact. I sort of wanted to speak to the benefits of having sort of like different perspectives on your Right Relationship team. I served for 2 years as sort of a liaison of sorts between the youth caucus as a youth chaplain, sort of a liaison to the Right Relationship team, coming to meetings and participating, but mostly being accessible to the youth at General Assembly because, it's always easier, it seems, to go approach someone with these kinds of conflicts that, looks familiar, that comes from a community that you're comfortable with. And so most of my sort of right relationship work has actually been at home and not here, and at home in my youth communities. A big sort of buzzword that we use a lot back home in those communities is the idea of restorative justice. We have a lot of feelings, of course. We have chaplains, we process those feelings, but then there comes a point where we need to sort of re-covenant with each other and come back to our spaces together, and that's sort of where our right relationship experience comes in. There sort of has been a situation in the past couple of years in my home district regarding the relationship between the various youth programs and the various district administrations and congregations, and a lot of people on a lot of different pages who are all very concerned about the well-being and the programming opportunities for youth in our district. There have been many conversations about how to best meet the needs of this youth community, and there were times when not all of those conversations were sort of respectful and possible because everyone was on different pages. the leaders of youth communities, the leaders of congregations and districts and whatnot. And it was very helpful to think about sort of the spirit of right relations and think that when these relationships became difficult, that we were able to sort of stick with those conversations and, stick through those long meetings and have conversations trying to sort of restore our relationships. My example is falling apart a little bit.
You're doing good.
But so it was really helpful to have learned sort of mediation skills through the right relationship team at General Assembly to sit through these really difficult conversations back home regarding a community that I loved, and sort of reminding those around me that when these things became difficult, when we really didn't want to have conversations anymore about what is our youth programming and who are we accountable to, that we sort of needed to continue to talk and continue to talk with people who have the skills to, move past feelings and get to like sort of more systematic problems that we were having. That's all I've got.
About 5 years ago, there began to be a shift in the direction of the GA Right Relationship team. What had once been a team that was situated predominantly for those from historically marginalized communities to go to with both feelings and concrete needs for change. And there is no doubt that the needs for change are still there. There's no doubt that the feelings are still there. But there was a shift by my predecessor to start to move us in a direction that had the members of the Right Relationship team be the mediators between parties as opposed to the mediators for parties. And that's an important shift to acknowledge. One of the challenges that we continue to have here at General Assembly, and that I assure you will happen in your congregations, is that the designated right relationship team can quickly be perceived as the fix-it team. As if any one or two given people could fix systemic institutional oppression. And I'm just saying it's a little challenging. And two, that anything that anyone thinks needs to be fixed can be directed to said team. So we continue to have those challenges today, and sometimes those apparent concrete fix-it moments are really undergirded with systems of oppression and deep needs of different kinds of change. So somebody left their program book on the bench and you need to deal with it, versus the language being used from the stage is oppressive around identities. Those are different fix-it moments. And part of what has to happen on a right relationship team is a clarity about what is ours and what is not ours. We use the shorthand sometimes of, is it a feeling or are you ready for the conversation? I don't know about you, but I know that I can't have the conversation until I've dealt with my feelings. I also know that I don't often like to deal with my feelings. I'm a born and bred Universalist New Englander. We don't like to deal with our feelings. So it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve for me, it's a learning curve for you, it's a learning curve for all of us. But when we think about the directions that the General Assembly Right Relationship team has turned in, that we serve to help those harder conversations between one who is experiencing the micro or macro aggression of oppression and one who may have been the perpetrator of that aggression, presumably, because we always presume best intentions, presumably not intentionally. Our job is, how do we take these two parties and sit down together to return to what was a good and now broken relationship? And it's a challenge. So, there are a couple of things that always have to happen for that to be true. One is, we must ask ourselves the question, are we ready to be in conversation? Or if you're on our end of the conversation, in the mediator's position, are you ready to have the conversation? You've come to me with a right relationship challenge. The words being used from the main stage are a reflection of a system of oppression that has always been there for you. And just for clarity, if it's been a system of oppression for one, it's been a system of oppression for all of us, which is why we get into this work. And it's why we do what we do to change our faith in the way we are with one another. That's what being in right relationship is all about. I don't think we actually mentioned that concretely. But we're all here presumably because we understand that to be in right relationship is to be able to honor all of one another's identities. It means that in the places where I have privilege, I'm willing to let go of that privilege to honor the places that you don't yet have the privilege. And that you're willing to let go of your privilege in the places that you have it, and in order so that you can honor the places in me that don't have that privilege yet. Right? You're with me? Just making sure. It's kind of a lull out there. So, are we ready to have the conversation? That's the first question. You've come to me, and my first question to you is, are you ready to have the conversation? How do you know? How's your heart rate? How's your breathing? How's the tapping foot and the tapping fingers? Are you able to look directly in my eye if you have sight? Are you ready to have the conversation? And here's the curveball. Are you ready to receive the other side of the conversation? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. Hence the chaplains. You cannot have a right relationship team work functionally without the chaplain side of the equation. Pardon me?
We're opening the doors to get some air in because it's a little...
Okay. It's a little disconcerting when your fellow workshop presenters start walking out the room. My heart's thumping. Touche. Ooh, that feels good. Okay, so... Yeah, exactly. So are you ready to have the conversation? Are you ready to receive the other side or sides of the conversation? What is your desired outcome for the conversation? Those are some of the most important questions to be asking anyone who's come to a right relationship team. And we try to do that. There's another piece of what the right relationship team does, and we've mentioned this from the big stage a couple of times, but that is that we pay attention to the patterns. Are we having a lot of conversations about fill in the blank? About fill in the blank. You can just put a line. I can tell you, let's be real. Let's be really real. I can tell you, this is my 5th or 6th time being on the team over the course of the last 10 years. And I can tell you that I come into General Assembly now with a short card of the issues that we're going to have to deal with. And it breaks my heart because it means that we're not changing fast enough. And when we're not changing fast enough, we're losing beloved members of our community. I can tell you that every year we are approached by members of our community who are people of color because comments are made around race and ethnicity. I can give you the concrete example in a modern day time of the Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. As if to say Black Lives Matter means not all other lives matter. I can tell you that every year We know that we're going to have conversations around people who would not move so that those using scooters and crutches could move through the hallway or get to the elevator. I can tell you that every year we're going to have conversations around folks who are wearing perfume and are sitting in the scent-free areas because that was the easiest place for them to sit. I can tell you about bathrooms and where they get located and who gets to use what. And this year we can tell you that despite caution tape and signs, there's some members of our community who are taking them down. I can tell you that every year we will have conversations around how our youth and young adults are treated in terms of being patronized and tokenized. And I could go on and on and on. And I bet you could too if you start thinking about it. And this is what I can say, that if we boil it all down, it comes down to there are those of us who are not willing to give up our privileged convenience so that others in our community can fully participate. If nothing else, the purpose of a right relationship team, whether here at GA or out there in your congregations, is to help us fix that problem. And it's not a technical problem, it's an adaptive challenge. So, that all said, how do you do it? A couple of years ago, we must have gotten really good at what we do on right relationship teams, or we must have at least gotten enough good publicity that we started to see an influx of folks coming into our room, not so much because they needed help having the conversations, not that that was a bad thing, but that they wanted to take what we do back to their congregations. And so we started talking among ourselves and we said, yeah, let's offer a workshop. Let's offer a workshop that helps you have some of the skill sets. And there's a missing component that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is that in order to be adequately equipped to do right relationship work, you have to have done your own work around oppression and privilege and allyship. And not to minimize that work at all, but there are entire series of workshops here and throughout the world where you can do that work. But you have to have done at least the basics before you can serve on any kind of a right relationship team. Because it's not just about mediation. It's not just about you're upset about what you said and you're upset because you're upset that I said something and now you're going to get the two parties together. Because the work that right relationship teams do is not just mediation, but sacred mediation. It's about how we are in beloved community. So that all said, to bring the work that the teams do into your congregations, you've got to have folks doing anti-oppression and ally building work, given. You also need to be able to put together a team with intentionality that does not necessarily look like the Board of Trustees plus the youth group. Although someday I hope that I can say it should look like the Board of Trustees plus the youth group. But to put together a team that shows a true intersectionality and cross-section, not of the community you are today, but of the community that we hope to someday be. And you have to support those folks. There needs to be chaplain or lay ministers, pastors, members of your community who can be present for all sides of all equations. If we want to do it well and right, that means peer chaplains in addition to clergy. It means not just saying the usually one minister in our congregations can do it all for us all the time. We need to be able to do it together. And it means taking the time to do the training, to learn and unlearn and relearn about privilege and oppression and identity. It means being willing to give up privileges, and it means being willing to get into the deeper conversations. As you set up your teams and train your folks, it means being able to ask yourselves constantly, Are we ready to have the conversation? Are we ready to hear part of a different side of the conversation? And what is our expected or hoped for outcome? I'll leave it at that and say, why don't we do some questions to see what you're thinking about? I'll ask that anyone who wants to ask a question to come up to the mic so that we can make sure everybody hears the question.
I'm Gigi Gordon from Marquette, Michigan. 2 questions. First, I think the statistics are that more than half of the UU congregations are like mine, lay-led with no pastor. So the first question is, what if you don't have that component available? Is it a futile exercise to try to set up a right relation team? And the second is, are there training materials available, including maybe a guidance to how we can do the work that precedes going into right relationship work? Where can we find that? Thanks.
I'll just stay up here, though I'm not the only one that's going to answer your questions. You don't need a minister to do this work. If you are in a congregation that doesn't have an ordained fellowshipped minister, you've probably figured out how to do pastoral care among yourselves. Chaplaining is pastoral care. So my recommendation would be to have somebody or a couple of somebodies who serve in that capacity to be designated to doing right relationship work as part of that. In terms of the pre-work to be ready, a lot of that is, I was about to say all over the place, which doesn't help you, I realize. But Allies for Racial Equality is a great place to do some of the anti-racism and unpacking around race and ethnicity work. The Welcoming Congregation program is a good place to start. The Living the Welcoming Congregation program is a good place to continue. Equal Access has great resources around accessibility. There are great UU resources, and honestly, there are great non-UU resources. So, you're welcome.
Hi.
Wait, we got more.
I just wanted to say that I think your regional staff is potentially a good place to go for resources like that. There are often cluster, programs at clusters or regional, meetings or whatever. There might be a staff consultant that could help you. I don't know that for sure. But the other thing is look for other congregations in your area. If you have any, you might be able to partner. You might be able to get some guidance from another minister that's there, or if somebody has that resource. I think I think this is a great opportunity for us to work together as congregations.
I've also been encouraged to add that the FOS Collaborative has a curriculum called Beloved Conversations, and that is specifically designed to help you do the internal work around privilege and race and identity. It's fabulous, if I do say so.
I'll second that. Yep.
Beloved Conversations is on the meadville.edu/FAHS, FOS. You can find it there. Beloved Conversations. Come by booth 637, and we will talk about it. But if you go to meadville.edu/FAHS, FAHS.
Hi, I'm Molly Monahan from the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship, and I'm wondering, I'm a little confused if I'm in the right room, because my understanding of our right relations work is a lot broader than what I'm hearing referred to today. Is anybody else feeling that? Good. Okay, I'm not alone. All right, so if you would to take the concept of right relations and spread it out much, much wider, what I wanted to get some direction on is what we haven't done, and I think is vitally in any group, is that it's one thing to work with the people who are still present and who have stayed to have the conversation. I want to find a template or some way I can, or our congregation can reach out to those who've left in a huff. I call it the exit interviews. And I think that we would have so much to learn from taking that leap to reach out to people in a way where they would be comfortable of sharing their pain and what had them walk out the door. And I'm looking for some direction from that.
So I know we've done in our church. So I'm at Tennessee Valley U Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so part of because we actually ended up, in terms of stewardship, wondering, like, why are people leaving? Right? Like, there's a reason why you end up going from 300 to 500 back to 400. And what has made people upset? And in some ways, people like went away from, people, well, at least my church used to do house meetings. We used to talk to people. We used to do, and then with the advent of technology, people kind of went away from going to people's homes, and actually like having group dinners and doing things the old fashioned way. And so what we ended up doing was going back and having people who were connected to each other, who knew each other from their kids being in RE, and having them call and say, can we talk? Can we have coffee? Can we have a meal and talk about what hurt you? Like, was it systemic, which is actually not an individual problem, it's a bigger problem? Or is it just something small that happened? Or is it something big, right? So someone left our church because their child wasn't allowed to go to Boston because of differing abilities, right? Which actually ended up being a right relationship team like issue. But people didn't realize that was the actual reason why they left. They just thought they just left because they wanted to. And they were upset, or they were just tired, or didn't want to come to church anymore. And so people went and were like really upset and were like, where's our friend? And called them on the phone. And so I think one of the biggest things is actually relationship building. Because when we forget about the day-to-day person-to-person relationships and actually maintain those, I think that's actually one of the biggest cores of having a right relationship team. Honestly, is actually developing personal relationships with people besides just the ministers. And I think that's actually one of the strengths of a lay-led congregation, is the members of the congregation themselves know each other and actually don't rely on staff to build that. And so I just want to say that's one thing that actually feels like that has helped our congregation.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you said. Some of what you said is what I was going to say, but there's another piece to it, which is that I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that if we are going to heal those relationships, people who have left because they feel that they have been microaggressed or various other, we're talking specifically about sort of oppression-based stuff in this context. I think that it's really essential that we engage in this specific individual and corporate work before we go back and say, come back into our fold. We need to, especially, and I speak as someone who is white, especially for those of us who are white, we want to fix the problem before we have felt the pain and acknowledged our voluntary or involuntary role in it. And I think that I want us to go back out and say, I'm sorry that you felt like we broke this relationship and we didn't serve you. But I think it behooves us to have done that internal work to understand why and to change the system before we go back and invite people in. Because it's not fair to say, we're sorry we hurt you, come back in, but we haven't done the work to understand why we hurt you so that we won't hurt you again. And so that's why I think for me, focusing on me doing the work that I need to do and you doing the work that you need to do and all of us doing our individual work so that we can then come together and have these conversations and mediated, coming back to the relationship moments. But that I think it's really important that we don't skip the hard part.
I'd also like to say that there are different teams for different spaces. For example, in a youth and young adult space, I would not have if something happened and a youth left, I would not ask my youth and young adult right relationship team members to go and call that person at their house to have them come back. That's not our job. Our job is to fix the community that exists right then and there. If people are leaving your space, like these folks are saying, look at your space first and see why it's unwelcoming to the people. Why are people leaving? There are a lot of great resources within the UUA for that, and I would suggest if you have like a congregational life staff person, they can usually point you in the right direction of some sort of programming or some sort of work you can be doing in your church for that.
And I want to say one thing, because I think that it is, I think one of the things that's, I actually don't normally use the word microaggression because that's just not the word that I came up using. So I just want to say that. So if you don't hear me use it, it's not because I don't like the word. That's just not my word. Racism, oppression isn't personal to personal. It's cultural. So if you don't actually do the work to change your culture, it doesn't matter. So the right relationship team is actually not functional if you don't also have a parallel process where you're dealing with the cultural and institutional oppression within your congregations. So we as a denomination do no longer have a strategy in the same way around addressing those things. A lot of our churches, some of them still have things happening, some don't anymore. So I want to say that if it is, we're talking about this as it's a person-to-person problem. It's not, right? Like, I can love you as a human being. It doesn't mean that you're going to I barely go to my own church anymore. And I grew up in it. So I just think it's really important for all of us to hold that we have to be changing our institutions, like not individually, but the institution itself. That's policies, that's procedures, that's the things on the wall, that's everything. So the right relationship team culture can shift, that's fine. In the end of the day, however, if we don't change the culture, it doesn't matter. People still won't be here and they're still gonna leave. So I just wanted to say that because we're acting like the two things aren't parallel processes. And they are. And it's easy to do one without the other, but then there becomes a conflict. And so the things that everyone is saying has to go alongside that. And I just wanted to say that out loud because I realize I've been sitting here like doing this with my fingers and I don't actually sit quietly. When I know that something has to be said, I've let that go a long time ago. And so I just encourage you, and that's why I wanted you to mention Beloved Conversations. I would love for people to talk to the multicultural staff. There's a whole lot of folk here that are doing really amazing organizing work. That's what I do every day, is how do we actually do right relationship as communities? And there's resources in your local community around this too. I just wanted to say that because I think it's really important.
My name is Rachel Rott, and I'm from Palomar UU Fellowship in Vista, California. And I first wanted to just say thank you for doing this. I have such gratitude and admiration for watching you guys interact at GA. It's really helped me personally to deepen in my own congregation, so I really appreciate it. My question is, I have sort of a vision for my own congregation, and I'm wondering if and how you see right relationship teams growing or being in some way related to committees on ministry, because I would love to see our committee on ministry go from being the thing that it is, which I don't think is a super healthy thing for our congregation, to being right relationship. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
I guess I'm taking this one. So in my 20-something years of working for our association and in congregations, I've seen a trillion different models of committee on ministry. So I want to just start there. And I don't want to get into the necessarily specifics of your congregation's makeup, but what I've seen most often is a committee on ministry that's really kind of sort of maybe where people go when they're not happy with the minister. And I don't think that inherently is healthy. So I just want to name that from the beginning. In an ideal setting, if we truly believe our theology, that we all have access to divine authority and power and knowledge, then a committee on ministry is a shared process, a shared way of keeping a pulse on the ministry of the congregation. Not the ministry of the minister of the congregation, but the ministry of the congregation. Clearly, and at least in the way I think of it structurally, the minister has to be an integral part to that work, to that committee, but it's not a report card of the minister. And so then if we're having a committee that's focused on the committee of the ministry of the congregation, the right relationship work happens because that's connected to the ministry. Because the ministry is about how are we with one another and how are we with the wider world. And that's about how we are in relationship.
Hi, I'm Patricia Wright from the Santa Monica, California Unitarian Universalist Church. And I would like to see effective tools for conflict resolution brought into our church community. And I was in the workshop on compassionate communication before this. And I'm probably more familiar with that model, the Marshall Rosenberg nonviolent communication. And I noticed that both of your session there, as well as this, started out by asking what are your most important values. But what I am less familiar with how a right relations team might be structured in our congregation. And I wonder if you can perhaps give me some guidance in that sense. Would we need both? You mentioned sorting of what might fall under right relations. Would that be a process of deciding what might be better handled by compassionate communication, which I have to admit is very difficult, or sending to the right relations team?
That's a good question. I think I can say that we all, as members of the right relations team, use different styles and strategies for conflict resolution. I'm trained as a chaplain. I've done nonviolent communication work. I've worked in the congregation. So I have one lens and one set of techniques that I use. Other people have other experience that they use. I think nonviolent communication is always a good option. The challenge with nonviolent communication is that, in my mind, is that in using nonviolent communication is that there is a point at which it becomes, it doesn't, if Halcyon and I are in a conflict and I'm using nonviolent communication and she either doesn't know about it or isn't willing to be in that space with me, there's only so far I can go using that sort of formal process. I think the tools, identifying needs, identifying, again, values, things like that are really, really useful tools. But I don't think there's any one way that you can use, that you should, there's not one strategy or one type of mediation or conflict management style that is essential to the process. And what I'm hearing from a number of folks is that you'd like some sort of more concrete resources specific to this thing, and I'm not sure we have that yet. And I try to avoid commenting myself into work, but but it seems like something we may need to consider as a team. You know, what it would look like to provide some of that in the future.
I'd like to. Is there anyone here from the Southwest District?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. A couple of y'all. If y'all have heard of the Dwight Brown Leadership Experience, they have a lot of great resources, and I'd like to hold up that that organization. And I think you can just look up DBLE. Just Google DBLE or Dwight Brown Leadership Experience, and you can find some great resources there to get you started.
Also, Sully, probably.
Oh yeah, and Sully.
Southern.
Yes. Southern UU Leadership Experience, SULE, SUULE.
I'm John Prohatsky from the Salem, Oregon congregation, a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and I really appreciate this session. You've addressed a lot of serious issues. You talk about cultural intelligence, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, very, very critical stuff. you're addressing one of the core differentiators of Unitarian Universalism. We're a covenant religion, covenant-based religion, not a credo religion. Covenant means relationships. And the work you're doing, I think, is foundational to Unitarian Universalism. In fact, it could be, I think it's the foundation that all the other things that we've talked about here can be built or maybe should be built upon. So saying that, have you ever seen a setup coming? So the question I have, and I'll give you a few examples, is was the right relationships team right relationship with the greater UU community? Now, what I want is going to UU's General Assembly, it's like drinking from a fire hose. And, you see something over here, see something over there, and nobody can quite put together or piece together the big picture and where we're going. So what resources are there available? Is there a one-page sheet? Is there white paper? Is there a roadmap that congregations can take? How about fostering a collaboration between congregations so they can help each other and share each other's experience?
So those are all great opportunities for change and growth and learning. The model that we have now, we are the General Assembly Right Relationship Team. And I want to point out right relationship. We often leave the ship out of that and we get into right relation team. We're the right relationship team to help us stay in right relationship with one another. Congregations can create within their covenantal community a right relationship team for their congregations. Clusters could create covenantal communities of right relationship teams for their clusters, regions, districts, etc. It's a shared process. There's no roadmap other than to say that the ultimate end goal is that while we will hopefully always be a covenantal community and while we are fallible and will probably always make mistakes in our relationships, that we will be in a default position to ask the question, how can I change to make space for you?
That's I agree with that.
So
but
can I say one thing? So one thing I do think is real. And there are materials out there. We actually have stuff around best practices. Like we need to develop something a couple of years ago so people knew what in the world we were. I think it is what I hear people saying is it is time for us to do an evaluation around what some best practices are. What has been good? What have been some beautiful things? There are some resources we have on this that are on this table. That's what I hear from you. So I think we hear that. I think it is honest that we were created. I guess I didn't say this in history. We were created by the moderator around GA and report to the GA Planning Committee. So it does not mean, though, that we could not ask the moderator, what would it mean for us to actually come together and bring some people who've done this for a while and people who are newer and do a best practices thing? To say what are some learnings for congregations. That doesn't mean we couldn't do that and to ask that. That's what I hear. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we hear you. It does not exist yet because there's been no actual process to make it happen. We didn't even know if people were interested, except for the few people that came. Now we know there's clear interest around it. So that's helpful. I just wanted to say that because I hear it multiple times and I just want to acknowledge, yes, we hear it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got time for maybe at least one, maybe two questions. And I do want to say, we're delighted that y'all are here. I think we were expecting maybe 15 or 20 people.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Erin White. I'm from the Fourth Universalist Society in New York City. I wanted to thank you first for providing some history. As a relatively newcomer to GA, it's really helpful to learn the history of how right relationship came to GA. In my congregation, we have a right relationship team because we freaked out when they said we had to dissolve our committee on ministry during the ministerial transition period, because we were all like, well, what's going to happen? How are we going to get through a board meeting without somebody sitting there making sure we don't kill each other? And that's really, honestly, the thing that I was surprised to not hear more about is the way that we talk to each other. And also, in my congregation, it's really, we've come to a place of understanding there's a lack of trust in each other. And trust is not a word I've heard from anyone here, and so I'm just interested in what role that your perspective that plays in right relations.
I think that brings to mind for me that we are really uncomfortable with sitting with discomfort, with things being messy. And the more practice we have in getting into difficult conversations and making sure that we stay in relationship even when we make huge mistakes or tiny mistakes, but not walking away forever, maybe taking a break and coming back and always coming back. And I think that that's what everybody on the panel has been saying. It's about that continued relationship and the commitment to stay together because we are a covenantal community. But it gets messy, and that doesn't mean we give up.
I would like to make an observation and a suggestion. I notice that when I walk around GA, very, very few people are smiling. Like 1 out of 200 people is naturally smiling.
It's so true.
And about 2 out of 100 people will smile back to me when I smile at them. And about 3 out of 100 people will make eye contact with me. Yes. So my suggestion is, because we need to educate ourselves and to learn how to be in beloved community, especially with people we don't know. So when someone new comes into the congregation, we can actually be with them. Yes. So I would like to suggest for the next GA a beloved community cafe that is an activity area in a hallway where people can come and self-select, sit for a minute, talk to someone that you don't know about a question on a piece of paper or something that's at the top of your head, or just sit and make eye contact and hold hands for 1 minute and see how the UU community changes when we practice what we need to learn, because we're going to keep screwing up if we don't start to learn how to be human beings.
So I'm gonna say 2 things to that. Apparently 3. Amen. Two, you have the power to make that happen. You have the power to, in your evaluation of General Assembly, make that suggestion. Having worked with the GA Planning Committee for decades, I will tell you that these incredibly dedicated volunteers read every word of every legible word of every legible line of every evaluation, and they give every piece of that fair consideration in balance with capacity to do. You have the ability to do that. The other piece I want to mention is that some of it's cultural. In the culture from which I come, direct eye contact and greeting on the streets is not part of our culture. It is not that we don't care for you. It is not that we don't like you. It is not that we don't want to get to know you. It is that culturally that is not appropriate. So part of how we need to be in right relationship is about learning about one another's cultures and respecting it. So we can say glibly change the culture, but that disrespects the culture from which I come from. That says you must change your culture entirely. We need to find ways to bridge into the middle. Yes, because you are the Right Relationship Team General Assembly Planning Committee liaison.
I am, and I want you all to know that we have every lunchtime let's talk tables. They were out there today. They were kind of mixed in with the mosaic tables, but they were there. They will be there tomorrow. They will be there the next day. There are table banners that are those things you set on tables that say "Let's talk," and there's some sheets with some questions in case you don't know what to talk about. You can look at these questions. So it's there for those folk who would like to try that. And where's that? Exhibit hall all the way in the back, and Mosaic was just doing it today, but they're not doing it tomorrow.
So thank you, Mary. We're out of time, and we want to respect your time. If you find yourself in a place where you would like to at some point serve on the Right Relationship Team at General Assembly, we are always looking for folks. We try to select a balanced team in a multitude of identities and skill sets. But talk to any one of us, or easiest is to drop us your contact information, and we'll let you know when the application process begins. Thank you all and have a great GA.